Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for tuning in and joining us for this professional development opportunity over scoring student work using a proficiency scale. First off, I would like to just ask you to fully participate in this training. This training is definitely done best in a small group setting with other teachers so that you can discuss your scoring, discuss your train of thought, and your thinking and ideas behind the scores that you would give each student. So there will be times throughout the training and the video where I ask you to pause the video, do some scoring, do some reading, do some discussion with people around you. So again, best done if in a small group. So let's begin by discussing two very important questions around the idea of what is the purpose of student grades. So these two questions are going to be posed to you. What do grades communicate in a traditional grading system? And what should grades communicate to students? Please take a minute, pause this video, and discuss these two answers with other teachers around you. So as you discuss these two questions with your colleagues, chances are that some similar themes came up in your discussion. Some of you might have talked about or thought about how in a traditional grading system, the grades communicate how many questions a student got correct out of a certain amount of questions. So if I gave them a quiz and I gave them a grade on it, it means they got 5 questions correct out of 7 questions, or so on. That's one option. Now, unfortunately, in the traditional system, we also bring in a little bit of baggage in our grading. So we might have also talked about that the grade communicates that a student can or can't turn in work on time. So if they turn in their work on time, their grade's probably higher than if they couldn't turn their work in on time. We also could have discussed that these grades communicate how a student behaves in class. So if they misbehave in class, chances are we're taking points off or things like that. When in all actuality, if we think about what grades should communicate, it really is pretty simple. They really should communicate what a student knows and is able to do academically. And as we move into our transition to really implementing scales at the middle and high school level, this is where our focus should lie, that grades and scores should communicate academically what students can do. In the behavior, the turning in work on time, all of those things will go on different scales and score differently than our academic scales. So if we were going to sum up this line of thinking, we would simply say that grading is not about getting blank correct out of blank. It's more about communicating with students where they are currently at in their level of understanding of the topic. Grades should reflect what students know and can do academically. And this is really where our focus needs to remain as we score students from a scale, again, academically. So let's transition to actually looking at a scale. So this is the 8th grade scale for Pythagorean theorem. When we talk about teaching from a scale, it's broken down pretty simple based on the scale. If you notice again, the targets always remain at the 3.0 level. These are our must-do when we come to teaching. We must plan, we must teach, we must assess off of the target. This is the main bulk of information that we have to make sure kids are exposed to, assessed to. Everything revolves around the 3.0 level. Down below, we have our 2.0 foundational content. Something to make sure we're aware of is that this is not a checklist. I don't have to go through all of the bullet points on here before I can score them at a 3. These are things we may or may not specifically even teach. We may or may not hit on all that are listed. It really is tailored to what students need. If you have a certain student or a particular class that needs more foundational level material to build them up for a 3, that's okay. But remember, our focus is getting them taught to and assessed at that level 3 information. Then finally, up at the top, we have our level 4. Again, this is above and beyond what grade level target is requiring. Something that we should note is the verbiage at the level 4 is different than at the level 3. So at level 4, it says the student can, versus at the level 3, it says the student will. Again, the 3.0 verbiage is the student will do this. We need to make sure we are teaching, planning, assessing everything to this level 3. The level 4 that's listed on your scale is one option. There are obviously other options and other ways for students to demonstrate that they have fully mastered the level 3 and can go above and beyond the grade level target. So when it comes to actually scoring students on their level of understanding, here is how the scale actually breaks down. So you can see it starts at a 0, and a 0 should be really hard for us to actually give a student, because if you read the description of a 0, what it's saying is that even with help, so even when you walk over, you're helping that student one-on-one, that the student is still not successful, no evidence given. So we really shouldn't be seeing a lot of zeros. We do want to note, though, that if you do give help to a student, that gets them to the 1.0 level, but above that, they can't get to if you're having to help them. And that's okay. Remember that these scores reflect a progression of learning. So when a student is at a 1, if I have to help them, I'm not saying, oh no, you're only at a 1. I'm saying you're at a 1 because I had to help you. Next time we try an activity with this standard or this target, I bet you can do it without my help, and we'll see if you've grown or progressed in your level of understanding. Again, keep in mind that mastery on the grade level standards is located at the 3.0 level of our scale, and this is what we're really pushing and striving for students to achieve. When we assess students in an SRG world, remember that an assessment is anything a teacher does to gather information about what a student knows and is able to do. In a traditional grading system, we would typically only think of assessments as quizzes and tests. Again, in an SRG system, it's literally anything that the teacher collects that you're going to score a student to see what they know and are able to do. Under this umbrella are really 3 different types of assessments that we might give our students. The first would be an obtrusive assessment. These types of assessments are more formal in nature, where the instructional process is interrupted and we sit down and we take our quiz. This is very similar to what we do in a traditional setting. Okay, I'm going to stop teaching. I'm going to give you this test, this quiz, this assessment piece. You're going to take it and you're going to hand it in to me, and I'm going to score you off the scale. That's obtrusive. We also have unobtrusive. This is more informal, and in fact, students may not even know that you are actually assessing them. Teacher observation and communication with students is really the key behind this. So this is as simple as just walking around during a student work time, asking questions, checking in with student work, and still being able to score them on the progression of learning that they're demonstrating during that time. The final type of assessment is a student-generated assessment. So in this case, it's very broad, it's kind of outside of the box, but students have control over how they want to demonstrate understanding. So this would be an example where you say, okay, our target is that you need to solve multi-step equations. Show me in any way that you want that you can actually do this. Demonstrate to me, you generate the assessment, you generate your work, show me that you can actually meet this target. All 3 types of assessments have a place in our SRG system, and all 3 types of assessments are key to showing us what students know and can do. At this time, I'd again like you to pause the video and discuss with your colleagues the 3 types of assessments. Specifically, I'd like you to think about how you've used unobtrusive and student-generated in the past. You may not have just thought of it as an assessment. So there's always the good practices that we're already doing, and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We just want to think about how we can highlight things that have already been taking place in our classes and use those to assess students. So take a minute, pause, and discuss. Now that you've had a moment to discuss, let's transition into the activity for today. We are going to be looking at an assessment that's over the Pythagorean theorem. I showed you that scale a minute ago. In this case, the assessment was obtrusive. So the teachers paused class, gave the students the assessment, scored the assessment separately, and returned it back to the students. They did know they were being assessed. They knew they would get a grade and a score on this particular assessment. Let's take a moment and look at how the teacher created this assessment and what is actually being asked of the students. First of all, as you can see at the top of the assessment, the teacher has listed the 2 targets that are going to be assessed during this time. In the past, we might have a test that addressed multiple targets, but in the end, students just receive 1 cumulative grade on the test. In this case, in the SRG system, if we're assessing multiple targets, we would give students multiple scores. So in this case, since we are assessing target 1, which is apply the Pythagorean theorem to determine unknown side lengths in right triangles in real world or mathematical problems in 2 and 3 dimensions, and we are also assessing target 3, explain a proof of the Pythagorean theorem and its converse, we will be giving each student 2 separate scores based on each target. One thing to note is that target 1 lists problems in 2 and 3 dimensions. This particular assessment only has questions in 2 dimensions because that's as far as the teacher was at the point where she was assessing their knowledge. She has not gotten into the 3 dimension yet, and that's okay. So we will get a good snapshot and a piece of evidence of where students are as far as the target pertains to 2 dimensions, knowing that the teacher is going to also come back and do some 3-dimensional teaching and practice and assessing. So let's take a look at how the teacher has set up each question. As you can see, the teacher has given this section a heading that shows which target is being assessed, T3, so target 3, as well as the level of difficulty and learning in this question. So at the end it says level 2. So it's very clear to students that if they can get these questions correct, they will have demonstrated their mastery at level 2 foundational material for target 3. The more clearly we can communicate to students the sections and the learning that's taken place, the better they will understand their own learning and be able to take ownership for what they know and don't know. You will notice as you look through this assessment that the teacher has provided level 2 and 3 questions for each target, and then her level 4 question encompasses both targets depending on how the student would answer it. Her level 4 question is also found at the end of the assessment. Our activity is going to center around 3 pieces of student evidence. First, we'll look at Antonio's assessment, then we'll look at Marco's assessment, and finally we'll look at Andrea's assessment. With your group, you're going to be scoring each student's work, discussing how you scored them, and then I will also give a quick breakdown of how I would score the student work, and you can compare your scoring to my scoring. The bit.ly link posted on the screen right now will take you to a OneDrive folder with PDF documents of each student's work. It also has an answer key to the quiz, along with the actual scale, the Pythagorean theorem scale for 8th grade that we are going to use to score our student. Please pause the video and take a minute to locate these materials. So let's begin by looking at Antonio's assessment. So here are the steps we're going to go through as we score Antonio's work. In a few seconds, you'll pause the video, open up the Pythagorean theorem scale, answer key, and Antonio's assessment if you haven't already. Next, you're going to score Antonio according to his performance, and at first we want to do this completely independently. After that time is done and everybody in your group has had a chance to score Antonio, then you'll come back as a group and discuss the scores you would give him. Importantly, I would like for you to explain with your group the reasoning behind your scores. So have that discussion as a group as to why you would give Antonio the score you gave him. At this time, please pause the video and work through these steps. Now let's look at Antonio's work together and see if your score matches up with the score that I would give him. As the quiz states, the first section is level 2 vocabulary material. That's simple recall and foundational level thinking. Antonio did answer all of the vocabulary correctly, which is fantastic, and tells us that he is at least at the level 2 at this point. Let's look down at the next question. So the next question is asking him to explain one way to prove the Pythagorean theorem. This would hit that level 3 target question. In his explanation, Antonio talks about that if the sides a squared plus b squared are equal to the length of the hypotenuse, you've proved that it is a right triangle. As we look at Antonio's point of reasoning, he does discuss the Pythagorean theorem and he can tell us that he knows that formula, but his wording is a little bit off. As we all know, a squared plus b squared has to equal the hypotenuse squared in order to prove the Pythagorean theorem and work out to be a right triangle. So in his case, he's on the right track of thinking, but I would not say he's all the way up to a level 3. So my score that I would give Antonio, based on the fact that he got all of the level 2 information correct and he's partially on the right track for level 3, would be a 2.5 or a 2.5. Now again, we have at the bottom of our paper a level 4 question, so this 2.5 is a tentative score. We might change it based off of his information on our final question on the assessment. So let's go ahead and look at the next group of questions. As we can tell from the way the questions are labeled, these next couple questions specifically address target 1, which was applying the Pythagorean theorem to determine unknown side lengths. We can see that the first group was our level 2 question, and it was simply just asking the students to determine which side represents side A, side B, and side C. We know that side C, 15, is the hypotenuse, so he has that correct. We know A and B could then be interchangeable for 9 and 12, so we see that Antonio does have this section correct, again telling us that he at least has level 2 understanding. So as we move down to questions A and B, we see again it's addressing target 1. We also see from question B that these are addressing level 3 thinking because it's asking him to determine unknown side lengths in our right triangle. As we can see, he has set up his problem correctly on A. He has then set up the formula correctly on B and solved it, given us the proper label and his answer of 11 and 62/100 feet. This tells us that Antonio not only has level 2 knowledge, but also has successfully shown us mastering target 3 when we're specifically talking about two-dimensional Pythagorean theorem. So we would go ahead and give him a score of level 3. Now let's look at our level 4 question and see if we can improve upon Antonio's score on either target. As we see, Antonio's work in relation to what the question is asking does not really provide us with information that allows us to improve his score, so we are going to leave his target 1 score at a 3 and his target 3 score at a 2.5 or a 2.5. Please take a minute to pause the video and discuss with your group what feedback you could give Antonio based on the scores we have given him based on his work that he's shown us on the assessment. The next student's work that we will score is Marco's. As we did with Antonio's, please take a moment to pause the video, locate Marco's assessment, score Marco's assessment individually, and then discuss with your group how you scored his work. Let's take a look at a possible way you could have scored him. Again, our first section is level 2 for target 3. As we look through this, we see that Marco has demonstrated that he still has some learning gaps in his understanding of our level 2 vocabulary material. We also see, if we look at the level 3 question, that all he wrote down was the formula, which the formula is true for Pythagorean theorem. It is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, but in no way does he attempt to explain how that formula helps us prove the Pythagorean theorem or that a triangle is a right triangle. With that being said, we can determine that since Marco got some of the level 2 material right, but in no means mastered it, and he didn't give us really anything to work off of for our level 3 material, that we can score Marco at a 1.5 or a 1.5. Remember, anything below 1.5 constitutes that we helped Marco. In this particular instance, we're going to assume that our teacher did not help Marco and that this is his work completely on his own, which leaves us at a 1 5/10 or a 1.5 score for our target 3. Again, we can still hang on to this and look at our level 4 question and see if he gave us anything else to work off of later. Let's move to the next section. If we look at our first set of questions that are again level 2, where we were supposed to label which side is which, we see that although Marco did get the first part right, that side A could be 9, he's incorrect about which side should be the hypotenuse, which again should be 15. As we look down at the level 3 questions, there is some information here that Marco gives us to kind of help us with his understanding. Although he did set up his problem incorrectly in the diagram, he was able to take his diagram information and set that into the equation correctly. So granted, he was wrong on his problem, but he's telling us that there are some aspects of Pythagorean theorem that he does actually understand. Although as we look further, again, we see that he got the incorrect answer even for his problem. So just like before, he's demonstrating that he has some level of mastery at number 2. He's still missing the bulk of number 2 and the bulk of level 3 information. So we're going to go ahead and give Marco a 1 5/10 on this section as well. As we talked about before, we want to look down at our level 4 question and see if there's anything that helps us give Marco any extra points or any extra credit for his learning progression. Unfortunately, as we see, Marco did not give us anything else to work off of on his level 4 answer, meaning that we're going to go ahead and leave his scores at a 1.5 and a 1.5. As we did with our previous section, please take a minute to pause this video, and we want to focus on what specific feedback we could give Marco to kind of help him move his learning in the correct direction. Now it's time to score our final student. That's Andrea. We're going to stick with the same procedures. Go ahead and pause the video here in a second. Get Andrea's assessment in front of you. Score her performance individually first. Then as a group, go back and discuss your scores, again, focusing on the reasoning behind the score you would give her. Go ahead and pause and work. So let's take a look at how Andrea did. Again, our first section is looking at target 3. We see that she clearly knows the level 2 vocabulary, all of which is correct. So the worst score we're going to give her is a level 2. Let's take a look at her level 3 answer. In Andrea's level 3 answer, she goes on to discuss that if the values that we plug into our formula of Pythagorean theorem can make the formula true, then the triangle is a right triangle. With that sentence, she is showing her knowledge that the formula has to be true in order for our triangle to in fact be a right triangle. She also goes on to discuss that you can prove if it's a right triangle by using graph paper, calculating the area of our boxes around the triangle, which she very well states that this could take forever though, which it does take a long time. So in reading through her level 2 and her level 3, we can conclude that Andrea does have a good grasp of how to prove the Pythagorean theorem, and we would give her a score of 3. Again, we can adjust that score as we look at her level 4 response later on. As we look at the next section of Andrea's work, we come to our level 2 question where we're just labeling sides. She does have our hypotenuse C labeled correctly, and she does something pretty cool where she says that A could be 9 or 12 and B could be 12 or 9 depending on how we label it. So she clearly demonstrates an understanding of simply just labeling sides on a right triangle, that level 2 foundational material. So we would say she's definitely at least at a level 2. If we look at our next set of questions, she has labeled her diagram correctly. She has shown her work how she solved using the Pythagorean theorem to determine the missing height in our particular right triangle as 11 62 feet. So her work does show us that she does have an understanding of applying the Pythagorean theorem in 2 dimensions. So for this particular time and score, we would have her at a 3. So again, we want to take our level 3s, look at our answer to our level 4, and see if we want to adjust either of our scores. For us, Andrea is our first student to really attempt to answer this question. So let's take a second and kind of go through what this question is asking and look at her response. So this question, again, is level 4, so it's above and beyond what the grade level standard is asking. Tells us that a second ladder is also leaning against the house. This ladder is reaching 18 feet high. It asks us to give an example of the possible measurements for the other 2 sides formed by the house and the ladder and explain their reasoning. So as you can see, Andrea went ahead and drew us a diagram that shows that the ladder is touching 18 feet high on the wall of the house. So Andrea begins her response with such a great sentence. She says, this question has many possible answers. Then she goes on to give us an example where she's put 4 feet as how far the ladder is placed from the wall. Then she goes on to actually use the Pythagorean theorem to solve for what our side lengths would be. To me, this is definitely demonstrating that she knows how to apply the Pythagorean theorem, that first target, and go above and beyond in a situation where she created one of the sides, she determined one of the sides, and found that third side, or found the hypotenuse length from that. So in my opinion, Andrea has shown us already in her response that her mastery of target 1 actually exceeds above and beyond what just the grade level is asking, which is simply to apply it. So I would go ahead and change Andrea's score on target 1 to a level 4. Now, depending on the rest of her answer, we might be able to determine that she has a better mastery of the proof of Pythagorean theorem, and we want to bump her up to a level 3.5 or a 4 on that. So Andrea also gave us this last sentence that says, but if I changed and had the ladder 6 feet from the wall, the third value would be different based on the Pythagorean theorem. So she's bringing in the formula and telling us that if we manipulate the values a little bit, we would have to change our third value, or the hypotenuse, for it all to work out. She is on the right track. If this was my student, I would ask her a little bit more of a probing question after this and given her some feedback and see if she can really dig a little bit deeper into how this proves that the Pythagorean theorem still works regardless of where we move the ladder. So for me, I would feel most comfortable just leaving Andrea at the 3.0 level. I could also see maybe a 3.5, but I'm just not ready to score her at a 4.0 quite yet, as I would just like to see a little more demonstration of her understanding of the proof of Pythagorean theorem. So to wrap up Andrea's, we have an understanding that she is above and beyond the grade level target, so we gave her a 4 on target 1. We think that she's directly at the target, maybe a little bit above on target 3, but we're going to keep her at that level 3. So again, what I ask for you to do, pause the video, discuss this with your group. What feedback specifically could you give Andrea, especially on target 3? What can you ask her to see if she can demonstrate maybe a little bit higher level thinking? So as we wrap up this training, thank you for taking the time to go through this, to hopefully learn a little bit, to discuss things and learn with your colleagues. Our final thought is that you got this. We are going to continue to learn and grow as a district together. Lean on your colleagues, and you can lean on Holly and I. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email and ask us. Our emails are on the screen. Thank you, and let's have a great year supporting our students.